If you'd like to purchase Magic Online cards at competitive prices, check out our web store at mtgoacademy.com/store.
Welcome to the finals. Time for round 3 with our Feast on the Fallen blue-black deck. On the draw again, and this is a one-lander. Now, with 2 lands, I think it would be an easy keep. With only 1, I think it's a bit too much of a gamble, because the Child of Night in this format doesn't have the board impact it used to have, and we're just too far away from getting 3 or even 4 mana, so I'm going to take a first mulligan here. And this is not a great hand, if you couldn't tell. So the only question is if a lone Welkin turn gives us a better shot at winning than a 5-card hand, and I don't think so. I'm just gonna mulligan, hope that we get there somehow. Playing against 7 with 5 is not great, but for example this stab wound has a lot of potential. So let's see what our opponent is up to. After the mulligan to 5 lands and Welkin turn, I wasn't beating the great draws of my opponent anyway, so it makes more sense to hope for a high variance draw on my side, and this could actually develop to be one. With the top deck Welkin turn, now a lot of draws are live. Swamp, of course, and even more Welkin turns would be great. Satyr Wayfinder is good for my opponent, but also not bad for us. With some nice cards in the graveyard there. My opponent gets the forest. Also not bad for us because it means less pressure than other 2-drops. And here we go with pretty much the play that we would have been able to make with our 6-card hand as well. Opponent does have the plains. Alright, Helios Pilgrim. This is going to be interesting. See what comes out. Maybe a Marked by Honor. Nothing? That's very, very rare. Okay. Can't always get there with the lands. So that means Divine Favor is in the graveyard. It's usually the norm to have at least 2 enchantments in your deck. If you play Helios Pilgrim, at least that's what I do. So I wouldn't be surprised if my opponent already has 1 in his hand. Let's just hope it's not a Spectral Ward. But to be honest, I probably wouldn't even beat Marked by Honor at this stage. Swamp. It feels like I have to play Carrion Crow here. Child of Night blocks the Reclamation Sage, which is slightly advantageous, but I also need to worry about winning the game, and Carrion Crow does that better. Also, Carrion Crow stops Satyr Wayfinder and Helios Pilgrim, so it's actually not that much worse on defense. Alright, this is not a Spectral Ward, this is a Soulmender. That's a good sign. Could be a Triplicate Spirits coming. No, just a Siege Worm. Alright, there are the lands. So I have a couple of options here. I can Stab Wound the Siege Worm, hold back the Carrion Crow, which stops everything but 5 points of damage from attacking. And then I have the Path Mage next turn to actually trade with the Siege Worm, or Shadowcloak Vampire, which isn't much better, of course. Could also just play the Child of Night and accept the fact that the Siege Worm is dealing me a bit more damage. That seems like the most reasonable line to take here. I don't think that I should attack with Carrion Crow. That seems far too ambitious. Not that this is a race I'm currently winning, but at least I'm giving myself the chance to do so, maybe. Actually, step 1 on C2M is almost an even trade with regards to the race. And my carrying crow is stopping 3 creatures currently. Well, Soulmender is gaining a life a turn, but that's fine. I'm very surprised that Reclamation Sage is not attacking here. Very surprised. Like, if my opponent has a okay, never mind. If my opponent has a Sanctified Charge, then you would just attack with Reclamation Sage. Even if you have a Soul of Theros, you attack with Reclamation Sage. I don't think, like, this trade is one you're always happy about. I mean, clearly I'm just dead to the soul, but yeah, this does make a lot of sense to me. I'll see what my opponent does here. I'm not showing any more cards, but I am representing either spouts. I just want my opponent to be a bit scared. And I also want to know if my opponent can be counted on to play around either spouts or not. So for example, if this is an attack with everything, I know that it's not within my opponent's range to play around either spouts, which I actually find shocking here. He's just going for it. Alright. I mean, this would have been my out to win the game, basically. If I have the either spouts, I'm just almost guaranteed to win, I think. I bring my opponent down to... Oh, well, I don't see it anymore. I think I had a pretty good shot then. Alright, Soul of Theros. I'm gonna bring in a Dissipate, that's for sure. And maybe some more. Tyrant's Machine doesn't seem like it gets the job done. Festa Gloom, I like against white, but what my opponent has shown, I'm not so sure that Festa Gloom is really what I want to be doing. Like, it would have killed a couple of his creatures, but none of them really mattering. It's probably still worth it, but I have to assess the fact that my deck is weaker than his, and I really need these Welcome turns to do a lot of work. So I think Festa Gloom is probably not the right approach. I also probably should have picked something to deal with a soul at some point. I don't have a 5-mana removal spell. I really don't have removal spells except for a card like Ulcerate. So I think Void Snare is the most reasonable inclusion to like delay the inevitable. My opponent has also shown that he's just fearless, so I can't really hope to bluff my opponent into believing anything bad could happen. So yeah, this seems like the cards I can bring in, Void Snare and Dissipate, to make things a bit easier on myself. Now, Sign in Blood, another Crippling Blight, Caustic Tar, I'm not the biggest fan of. Also the Festa Gloom I already talked about. There's Tyrant's Machine, but if my opponent really has the soul, it's very unlikely that a Tyrant's Machine is going to get me there. I kind of like the Aeronaut Tinkerer, also for its defensive capabilities. And I don't want to take out the Sacred Armory, because I also have a Stab Wound, which is already a target for the Reclamation Sage. I'm looking at the Zoff Shade, which I might do without, because my opponent has green-white ground creatures, so Zoff Shade loses some of its appeal. And then I'm actually not sure. I'm gonna keep in the Feast on the Fallen, so I actually have even more targets for my opponent's Reclamation Sage. Not much I can do about it. I find it kind of difficult to cut a card here. It's actually probably Child of Night. It pains me to cut a 2-drop from this deck because they are so important, but given the power level of what my opponent has shown me and the Satyr Wayfinder, Child of Night is just not cutting it. So, you know, this looks fine. One Crippling Blight I'm happy to have, and I'm hoping that the 14 creature sideboarding plan works out. To be fair, I also mulliganed to 5, but that was not really the reason for the loss. I clearly wouldn't have beaten Soul of Theros with more cards either. This hand looks pretty nice though. For the first time, I think, the Aeronaut Tinkerer supported by Sacred Armory. It's no Feast on the Fallen, but it's going to be good. No play is also great news for me. I'm gonna lead with Carrion Crow here. It has, if anything, it has a disadvantage if it comes later. And the Tinkerer has more toughness and comes into play untapped. Alright, this is also good. As long as the Sacred Armory stays alive, Aeronaut Tinkerer is going to be superior to Carrion Crow. Not if it gets Reclamation Sage now. Alright. I suppose I could have held back the Armory. But with this kind of hand, it didn't look like I wanted to afford delaying my place for too long. Also, it would have made the Tinkerer flying, given the Tinkerer flying immediately, which was certainly relevant. Didn't work out as well as I hoped. The one game where I've cast Jace's Ingenuity, I've lost the game. So this might be a sign that it's just not the right fit for this kind of deck. Plummet was a problem card previously, so alright, so I have the Frostlings to potentially just tap down the Pilgrim, and I can Crippling Blight the Reclamation Sage. That makes it very unlikely that my opponent puts the Divine Favor on the Pilgrim. And that could mean that I get to Peel from Reality in response to deny my opponent the 3 life. Not that it's super relevant, but I want to get some damage in. My opponent has the superior late game, I have to be aware of that. And if I draw land, I have both instants available to hopefully draw me into a Dissipate. Okay, interesting. It didn't seem like my opponent had too many auras in his deck, but oh well, that's definitely a good turn of events. At least we get to cast Jace's Ingenuity. Opponent back on 21 with a 4/6 is a bit of a problem. And a Living Totem. The Greedy Invasive Species pump. Interesting. So if the species attacks here, I think I'm still just taking it. I can still peel next turn. And these few points of damage are less important than using my mana effectively here. Especially with cards like the ones I just drew, which are going to be super valuable. The Reclamation Sage taking out the Armory almost already turned the game around in a really big way. I think my opponent would have held back the Reclamation Sage, most likely, if I don't play the Armory, but you never know. So I might have given my opponent an easier time there. So if this is Soul of Theros for my opponent, I don't think I can win. I feel like I have 2 Frostlings. I have to block and peel to get the invasive species small again, to somehow start turning this to my favor. It's also an interesting attack, probably a combo trick of some sorts. I could double block the totem, but I don't want that. I'm just fine losing my Tinkerer to losing my Tinkerer to a combo trick. It's not like the Tinkerer would get flying anyway. Okay, this is very beatable, I think. Okay, my opponent might return it to hand, but that seems a lot better for me than the alternatives. So the Path Mage is interesting because I can make the Tinkerer unblockable, but the Tinkerer is my best blocker here, so that doesn't seem correct. Casting Frostlings on this board is a bit unnecessary. If my opponent does have the extra land, I probably want to double block a Twin Grove, but I can do that with Coral Barrier as well. Yeah, Coral Barrier is a bit less aggressive, but the better option here. My best line is probably to go for a 6/6/6 approach. Okay, there's the forest. It's already bad, but not the end of the world. I have good blocks for my opponent's 3/3s. And if my opponent wants to return the Twin Grove, I have a lot of time. Oh, okay. So now I think... Yeah, I think I'm just out of outs here. I'm going to tap down the soul. And then my opponent is going to attack and use it anyway. And that just kills me. I'm not even going to try to play around that because I fully expect my opponent to go for it. Given that my opponent went for it in a much tighter spot, I really see no way that my opponent is not doing it here. It would actually be nice to have an encrust now. I think that also prevents activated abilities, but you would have to tap the soul first and then encrust it, otherwise you're still facing a 6/6 vigilance. Alright, nothing of interest. It's not like I really have much to do here. +2/+2 first second lifelink. I mean, I can block the Elvish Mystic and get out alive. I can't kill the Living Totem with any kind of block. And the rest is just chump blocks anyway. So this looks like a reasonable block at least. Alright, I'm generally not one to concede prematurely, but well, this game is not a lot of fun on my side. I'll give my opponent I'll allow my opponent the fun of beating me down with an army of life-linking first strikers. But there's just very little that my deck can actually do against this. I kind of need to have the Dissipate. And my opponent put too much pressure on me to, for example, already play the Peel. To be honest though, I don't think that I would have even been able to stop what my opponent was up to. Alright, this means that my M15 winning streak in recorded draft is over, finally. But I'm very happy with the 4 packs out of this deck. This deck was definitely nothing spectacular. I think it was solid, It had a few good uncommons, but yeah, other than that, it wasn't really an 8-4 winning deck list. I did enjoy showing you Feast on the Fallen and its potential, and I think this was a good deck to showcase that it's more than an unplayable last pick. It definitely has its merits. It is a card that increases variance, but this deck made good use out of that fact. Alright, I'm sorry if I maybe didn't play as tightly as I usually do. I did have a very long day at work, and I'm still recording this to get you some more content. I'm hoping you enjoy the show. I'm thrilled for Cans of Tarkir. I'm really looking forward for the wedge set with all the different strategic implication that brings, especially when it comes to drafting colors, mana fixing, and setting yourself up to reap the rewards of one of the wedges that are to be drafted. That's it for today. Zima Godson recording Simon Says for mtgoacademy.com. I hope you're enjoying the show and get something out of every single draft. Bye bye.